Our first story takes us to a place that no longer exists on any map, a forgotten train station buried deep in the woods. The station was once part of a bustling railway line, but after a mysterious accident that claimed the lives of an entire trainload of passengers, it was shut down and erased from official records. Yet, rumors persist that on certain nights, the station reappears, and if you're unlucky enough to be there, you might just catch the last train. This story follows a young man named Alex, who was hiking through the woods when he lost his way. As night fell, he came across the abandoned station, shrouded in mist. Relieved to find some sign of civilization, he decided to spend the night there, planning to find his way out in the morning. But as midnight approached, he heard the distant sound of a train whistle, growing louder and closer. Confused, Alex looked down the tracks, and to his shock, he saw the faint lights of an approaching train, emerging from the darkness. The train pulled into the station, its doors sliding open with a creak. The interior was dimly lit, and though it appeared empty, Alex felt a strange compulsion to board. He stepped inside, the doors closing behind him with a finality that sent a chill down his spine. As the train started moving, Alex noticed that the scenery outside the window seemed wrong, distorted, as if the train was passing through another world. He tried to move to the next carriage, but found the door locked. Panicking, he turned back to the window, only to see the reflection of the passengers' shadowy figures with hollow eyes, staring at him. The train began to speed up, the lights flickering, and then, with a jolt, it derailed. Alex braced for impact, but instead of crashing, the train vanished, and he found himself standing back at the deserted station, completely unharmed. But as he tried to leave, he realized something was wrong. No matter which direction he walked, he always ended up back at the station. The train, the station, the passengers, they were all part of a never-ending loop, and Alex had become the newest passenger, doomed to ride the ghost train for eternity. Our next story centers around an object most of us take for granted, a mirror, but this isn't just any mirror. Found in a dusty old shop by a young woman named Sarah, this mirror had a peculiar quality. It didn't show the present, but rather, glimpses of the future. At first, Sarah was fascinated by this, but soon, her fascination turned to terror. After bringing the mirror home, Sarah noticed strange things reflected in it, things that hadn't happened yet but soon would. At first, it was small, harmless things, a phone call from an old friend, a surprise visit from her parents. But then, the mirror started showing darker visions. One night, Sarah saw herself in the reflection, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, in the shadows, a figure stood, a man she didn't recognize, his face twisted with rage. Panicked, Sarah turned, but the room was empty. She tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but the next night, the vision was clearer. The man was closer, and this time, she could see a knife glinting in his hand. Terrified, Sarah tried to cover the mirror, but the vision burned in her mind. The following day, she found herself on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder. That evening, she couldn't resist peeking under the cloth covering the mirror. The reflection showed her in bed, asleep, while the man loomed over her, the knife raised. Frantically, Sarah tried to smash the mirror, but it wouldn't break. Desperate, she decided to stay awake all night, clutching her phone, ready to call the police at the slightest noise. But as the night wore on, exhaustion overtook her. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the man's reflection in the mirror, stepping out from the shadows. The next morning, the police found her in bed, the mirror shattered on the floor, but there was no sign of forced entry and no weapon. The only clue was the look of terror frozen on her face and a single shard of glass showing her final moments. Lighthouses are symbols of safety, guiding ships to shore through treacherous waters. But what if the light was guiding something else? Our next story takes place in a remote lighthouse, where a new keeper, Marcus discovered that the light didn't just guide ships, it also kept something else at bay. Marcus had just taken over as the lighthouse keeper, a job that required long periods of isolation. The previous keeper, an old man named Harold, seemed eager to leave, offering only cryptic warnings about keeping the light burning at all costs. Marcus brushed it off, attributing it to the old man's loneliness, and settled in for his first night. As the storm rolled in that night, Marcus noticed something strange. Whenever the light swept over the water, he thought he saw something in the waves, just for a split second. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the more he watched, the more convinced he became that something was out there, something massive, just beneath the surface. Curiosity getting the better of him, Marcus went outside, peering into the stormy night. The light swept across the ocean again, and there it was, a dark shape, rising from the depths, just for a moment before disappearing back into the black water. The sight sent a chill down his spine, and Harold's warnings echoed in his mind. That's when the power went out. Frantically, Marcus rushed to the generator, struggling to restart it as the lighthouse plunged into darkness. The sound of the waves grew louder, more menacing, as if something was coming closer. Finally, the light flickered back to life, and Marcus rushed to the window. The shape was gone, but something else had washed ashore, a boat, wrecked, with no signs of life. The next morning, Marcus investigated the wreck. Inside, he found the logs of the previous keepers, each one describing the same thing: sightings of the creature, the light going out, and then a wrecked ship appearing. Each keeper had eventually vanished without a trace. Realizing the truth, Marcus knew what he had to do. He couldn't leave, but he could ensure the light never went out again. Days later, the authorities arrived, finding the lighthouse empty, save for Marcus' final entry, warning the next keeper of the danger lurking in the waves. Forests are often depicted as places of beauty and serenity, but they can also be places of darkness and mystery. Our fourth story is about a forest that was rumored to be haunted, not by spirits, but by the very trees themselves. The locals called it the Whispering Forest, and anyone who ventured too deep into its heart was said to never return. A group of friends, intrigued by the legend, decided to test it out for themselves. They entered the forest at dusk, eager for an adventure. At first, everything seemed normal, just the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. But as they ventured deeper, the atmosphere changed. The air grew thicker, the light dimmer, and the trees seemed to close in around them. Then, they heard a faint whispering, just beyond the edge of hearing. They paused, looking around, but saw nothing. As they continued, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the trees themselves were speaking. The friends laughed it off, blaming the wind, but unease crept into their hearts. As night fell, the whispers became voices, distinct and haunting. They spoke of things the friends had never told anyone, secrets they had buried deep. Panic set in as they realized they were lost, the path back obscured by the thickening fog. The trees seemed to move, shifting and closing off any escape. Desperate, they ran, the whispers turning into screams, accusing and relentless. One by one, they disappeared into the fog, their cries for help cut off by the darkness. By dawn, the forest was silent once more, the only sign of the group being a single, torn backpack found at the edge of the woods. The Whispering Forest remains, its secrets buried in the roots of ancient trees. And those who hear its whispers are never heard from again. Our final story revolves around an ancient, forbidden game known as the Midnight Game. Originating from an old pagan ritual, the midnight game was used as a punishment for those who disobeyed the gods. It's said that those who play this game open the door to something dark, something that shouldn't be summoned. A group of friends, intrigued by the legend, decided to play the midnight game as a joke, not truly believing in its power. The rules were simple: write your full name on a piece of paper, prick your finger to add a drop of blood, and place it in front of your door. Then, you knock on the door 22 times, with the 22nd knock coming precisely at midnight. After that, you must light a candle and keep it with you at all times. Despite their nerves, the friends followed the instructions to the letter. As the clock struck midnight, they felt a sudden chill in the room, but laughed it off, lighting their candles and sitting in the dark. The game had begun. The rules were clear: they had to keep moving, never stay in one place for too long, and never let their candles go out. If their candle did go out, they had only 10 seconds to relight it, or the midnight man would catch them. At first, it was all fun and games, but then strange things started happening. Shadows moved on their own, the temperature dropped dramatically, and they began hearing whispers, voices that seemed to come from nowhere. One by one, their candles flickered out, plunging them into darkness. The whispers grew louder, turning into eerie laughter, as if the midnight man was toying with them. As the night wore on, the friends' nerves frayed. They tried to stay together, but the house seemed to conspire against them, doors slamming shut, paths closing off. The midnight man was closing in. They could feel his presence, a cold breath on the back of their necks, but whenever they turned around, there was nothing there, just the dark, waiting. In a last-ditch effort, they decided to end the game early by surrounding themselves with salt, hoping it would protect them. But as they huddled together, the clock struck 3:33 a.m., the time when the midnight game was supposed to end. For a moment, everything was silent. They thought they had won, but then the door slammed open, and the last candle went out. The next morning, the house was found empty. The police could only speculate what happened to the friends, as there were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of foul play, just the eerie silence of a house that had seen something it shouldn't have. The midnight game had claimed its latest victims, leaving behind only the whispers of what once was. And there you have it, 5 unique, chilling tales that remind us that horror can lurk in the most unexpected places. Whether it's a train station lost in time, a mirror that sees too much, or a game that invites something dark into your life, the unknown is always waiting, just out of sight. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, some stories are better left untold.